What if everything you believe about women, their strength, their struggle, their so-called freedom, was built on a lie so seductive, even they can't see it? What if the female revolution didn't liberate them, but only upgraded the prison? We're living in a time where women are more visible than ever. CEOs, politicians, influencers, icons of empowerment plastered across timelines and TED Talks. But look deeper. Strip away the filters, the empowerment slogans, the curated self-love. What do you see? A quiet epidemic of antidepressants, surgeons selling confidence by the inch, Hinge dates that feel like job interviews, egg-freezing parties hosted by HR. I don't need a man spoken into empty apartments, and beneath it all, a fatigue that no one is allowed to name. This is not hate. This is not nostalgia for patriarchy. This is not your usual internet rage bait. This is an autopsy of a myth, the myth that modern womanhood is thriving. Because here's the truth. The feminist dream was hijacked. What began as a fight for dignity became a marketplace of identity. Now, instead of chains, women wear expectations that look like freedom, but feel like pressure. Be beautiful, but effortless. Be soft, but ruthless. Be sexually liberated, but never ashamed. Be maternal, but not boring. Be everything to everyone, but don't ever admit you're tired. This is the cost of modern empowerment. Performance over presence, dopamine over depth, visibility over reality. And no one dares to say it. Because the moment you do, you're accused of betrayal. But this isn't betrayal. This is the medicine, and it's bitter. Let's begin. Women today are under more pressure than ever, not from oppression, but from contradiction. She's told she's free to choose, to define herself, to be anything. But that freedom has turned into confusion. There's no center, no reference point. The modern woman is expected to balance ambition, hyper-independence, emotional intelligence, femininity, sexual liberation, healing, self-awareness, and financial success, all while staying likable, soft, real, and effortlessly put together. It's no longer about being a woman. It's about performing the perfect version of one, constantly, publicly, and flawlessly. This isn't empowerment. It's quiet self-destruction. Identity has become a curated persona. Social media didn't just amplify this, it structured it. Every version of herself must now be content. The gym self, the spiritual self, the seductive self, the career self. Each one optimized, filtered, and sold. But none of it feels solid. None of it sticks. She's becoming more known to others than she is to herself. It's not that she doesn't know who she is. It's that there's no space to even ask. And behind the wellness language, the self-help podcasts, and the therapy talk is one uncomfortable truth. She's lost. Not because she's weak, but because the culture has pushed her into a game where being everything means being nothing, where the pressure to be enough never ends, where femininity is marketed to her in pieces, never given to her whole. This isn't a personal failure, it's systemic fragmentation. But no one's going to fix it. And until she stops performing identity and starts confronting the void underneath, she'll keep spinning. Louder, smarter, prettier, but emptier. Choice has become a curse. What was once freedom is now paralysis. From relationships to careers to identities, everything is negotiable, everything is customizable, and everything is temporary. But when everything is possible, nothing feels real. Commitment feels like a trap. Settling on one thing means cutting off 100 others. And this silent fear of choosing wrong, of missing out, infects every decision she makes. Dating is the clearest example. There's always someone else, somewhere, just a swipe away. The guy she's seeing is decent. But what if there's someone with better ambition, better looks, better conversation? She can't stop scanning. Not because she's disloyal, but because the system trains her to be unsatisfied. Every man becomes a placeholder for a better man who probably doesn't exist. Real connection collapses under the weight of endless potential. But it doesn't stop at men. She jumps between careers, ideologies, even lifestyles, constantly editing her identity like an unfinished draft. Vegan this month, poly next month, burnout today, entrepreneur tomorrow. It's all surface-level transformation, no inner architecture. Because somewhere along the line, she internalized the lie that change equals growth. That motion means progress. That keeping her options open is smarter than building something solid. But no one tells her the cost of infinite choice is depth. You can't build a real life while constantly trying to upgrade it. You can't discover who you are if you're always halfway out the door. At some point, choosing something and owning it is the only way to stop living in limbo. The world won't make that choice for her. It'll just keep offering her more. She doesn't need heroin. She's already addicted to approval. The dopamine hits don't come from needles. They come from hearts and likes and comments. Every selfie, every filtered story, every cryptic caption is a transaction. Her value is no longer internal. It's crowdsourced. Her self-worth is only as real as the reaction it gets. And when the applause fades, the silence feels like death. This isn't vanity. It's survival in a digital arena where relevance is currency. She learned early that being seen means being safe, and so she builds a brand, not a self. Curated angles, highlight reels, manufactured depth. She becomes fluent in attention, but foreign to authenticity. The problem isn't that she's fake. The problem is she doesn't know who she is without the performance. Even offline, the addiction bleeds in. She molds her personality to fit the room. She studies what's rewarded, then becomes it. If sensitivity is trending, she's a poet. If dominance is praised, she's alpha. It's not deceit, it's survival instinct misfiring. The identity shifts so often that even she loses track of where the mask ends and the person begins. But the more validation she gets, the emptier she becomes. Because deep down, she knows approval given for performance is never real. It's rented, and it vanishes the second she stops playing the part. She can't stop checking who's watching. Not because she wants attention, but because she fears disappearing. The ultimate nightmare isn't being disliked. It's being invisible. No one taught her how to build a self that can exist without being constantly applauded. So she clings to the crowd like a mirror, hoping if enough people reflect her back, maybe she'll finally recognize herself. But 1,000 eyes can't give you a soul. Only silence can. She didn't want to become a man. She just didn't want to be weak. But in a culture where strength is dressed in testosterone, she swallowed the blueprint whole. Independence became isolation. Assertiveness turned into hostility. Vulnerability treated like a disease. She wasn't rising as a woman. She was escaping being one. Somewhere along the line, femininity got rebranded as fragility. Nurturing, submissive, receptivity, powerless. She was told if she wanted respect, she had to dominate. So she buried the softness, sharpened her words, armored her heart, and called it growth. But what looked like power was just fear in a tailored suit. She doesn't trust men, not because they hurt her, but because she became one in defense. The irony? She still craves polarity, still wants to be held, led, chosen. But she can't submit to a man because that would mean surrendering control. And in her world, control equals survival. So she ends up in this paradox, wanting connection, but only on her terms, wanting intimacy, but refusing to need anyone. The cost of mimicking masculinity is that she loses the power only women carry, the one that isn't loud, but still undeniable, the one that doesn't compete, but captivates, the kind of strength that isn't about taking space, but creating it. She thought she had to become hard to be taken seriously, but in the process, she became invisible to everything that could have made her feel real. She didn't evolve. She compensated. And now, behind the success and the confidence, there's a woman who's never really felt safe. Not in the world, not with men, not even with herself. Because somewhere deep down, she confused becoming powerful with becoming less of herself. There was a time when victimhood was a temporary state, a bruise, not a badge. Now, it's a personality, a worldview, a strategy, not healing, not moving on, just marinating in the identity of the harmed. Because in a world obsessed with moral hierarchy, the victim always wins. Attention, sympathy, immunity. The crown goes to whoever suffered most, or said they did. It's no longer about what happened. It's about how well you can package it. Pain isn't private anymore. It's content. Trauma is currency. The louder the cry, the bigger the audience. But here's the problem. When victimhood becomes your value, healing becomes a threat. Because healing would mean losing your entire identity. And in this game, staying broken gets more applause than getting better. The result? A generation allergic to accountability. Everything becomes someone else's fault. Relationships fail. Men are toxic. Opportunities disappear. The system is rigged. Self-discipline? Oppression. It's always what was done to me, never what I refuse to face. They romanticize struggle, but demonize resilience. Empowerment is preached, but personal responsibility is taboo. And what's worse, real victims are now harder to see. The noise drowns the genuine. The abused, the silenced, the truly oppressed, buried under a mountain of self-inflicted narratives. Everyone's a survivor now. Of what exactly? A breakup? A job interview? A harsh comment online? This isn't strength. It's performance. A culture addicted to being offended, allergic to growth, and terrified of accountability. The worst part? It feels righteous. It feels like truth. But all it really does is keep people small, celebrated for their wounds, never for their scars. Because healing requires letting go. And in today's world, there's too much power in staying hurt. Masculinity didn't die. It was sedated, stripped of its edge, mocked into passivity, and replaced with a hollow caricature. The apologetic man, terrified of his own instincts. Strength, decisiveness, assertiveness, all rebranded as threats. The modern world doesn't want men. It wants ornaments. Silent, compliant, emotionally neutered ornaments. This didn't happen overnight. First, boys were medicated for being restless. Then they were taught to sit still, speak softly, and apologize for wanting to lead. Schools became correctional centers for male behavior. At home, father figures vanished, or were present in body, but erased in influence. Now we wonder why men are disengaged, addicted, checked out. The truth? They're not broken. They're unwanted as they are. What we've created is a vacuum. Men are told to suppress their nature, but never shown how to channel it. They're blamed for being too aggressive, then mocked for being too soft. Told to protect, but not lead. Told to feel, but not act. It's a no-win script. And so they detach. They ghost responsibility, reject commitment, numb out through porn, pills, distractions. Not because they're heartless, but because they've been taught that their natural drive is dangerous unless tamed. But society doesn't survive without men who know how to bear weight, who take hits without collapsing, who can protect, build, and stay grounded when everything shakes. We don't need more men who cry on command. We need more who can think clearly when chaos hits. Emotional intelligence isn't weakness, but neither is stoic strength. You need both, and yet only one is allowed to exist. The irony? When men become what they're told to be, docile, avoidant, malleable, they're despised even more. Because deep down, everyone knows you can't shame a man into being better. You can only bury him. We've been told that women mature faster than men, that they grow up sooner. But what does that actually mean? Emotional outbursts called intuition? Passive-aggressive manipulation dressed up as communication? Or a curated social media persona mistaken for self-awareness? The truth is, maturity isn't about having feelings. It's about managing them. And the silent epidemic is just how many women mistake emotional volatility for depth. It's convenient to pretend emotional expressiveness equals wisdom. But maturity isn't crying on Instagram or cutting people off under the guise of protecting peace. That's self-absorption, not growth. Watch closely and you'll see. Many so-called mature women still use the same tactics they did at 16. Silent treatments, emotional blackmail, image crafting, peer validation. The packaging changed. The game didn't. Modern culture rewards this illusion. A woman posts a breakup selfie with a quote about self-love. She's applauded for her strength. Meanwhile, her decisions are still impulsive, her accountability absent, and her worldview curated by whatever podcast or TikTok trend is selling the latest therapy language. She's not maturing. She's just getting better at disguising immaturity with spiritual wallpaper. Maturity is restraint. It's the ability to delay gratification, to admit when you're wrong, to sit in discomfort without blaming the world. But when every emotion is treated as gospel, and every consequence as someone else's fault, maturity dies, and no amount of journaling, energy healing, or red flags talk will replace raw self-honesty. The lie of female emotional superiority has become untouchable. Say the truth, and you're labeled bitter, sexist, insecure. But the irony is brutal. The more we protect women from criticism in the name of empowerment, the less empowered they become. Because real growth starts when the mask comes off, not when it gets more expensive. There was a time when victimhood meant something real, something tragic, something undeniable. Now, it's a brand, an identity, a strategy. The victim costume has become the most powerful currency in modern social dynamics, especially among women. Not because it reflects truth, but because it guarantees attention, protection, and most importantly, exemption from accountability. Look around. The incentive structure is broken. You're rewarded more for how oppressed you feel than for how strong you've become. Adversity used to forge resilience. Now it's a marketing tool. Trauma isn't something to heal from. It's something to center your personality around. Post about your triggers. Get validation. Talk about your ex. You're a survivor. Keep repeating it. And now you're brave. But real bravery would be letting go of the story. And that doesn't get likes. This isn't to deny suffering. But the problem begins when people stop trying to move forward, when the past becomes their brand. Victimhood becomes addictive because it absolves responsibility. You don't have to change if you're always the one who was hurt. You don't have to be better. Everyone else just needs to understand your pain. Growth dies in this mindset. Reflection dies. And the worst part? The people most stuck in this loop genuinely believe they're healing. Being wounded doesn't make you wise. Carrying pain doesn't mean you see clearly. In fact, unprocessed pain distorts everything. Relationships, choices, even identity. But in a culture that glamorizes struggle and punishes strength that isn't soft, the victim becomes sacred, unquestionable. And the longer we let that go unchallenged, the more we raise a generation of women who think being damaged is a destination, not a phase. Healing isn't loud, it's invisible. And you can't heal when your wounds are your brand. They say it's all about energy now. Protect your energy. Her vibe was off. I just felt a weird frequency. These phrases are everywhere. It sounds deep, spiritual, even enlightened. But dig beneath the surface, and most of the time, it's nothing more than emotional laziness dressed up as self-care. This obsession with energy is rarely about intuition. It's about convenience. It's a way to shut down communication without ever being questioned. You don't like someone? Call it a bad vibe. You're uncomfortable with criticism? Say their energy is toxic. You ghost someone? Just say your peace was disturbed. No accountability, no conversation, just spiritual jargon used as a shield. And ironically, it's the people who constantly talk about energy that leave the most chaos behind them. When energy becomes your compass, you start treating people like vibrations instead of humans. Nuance disappears. Conflict resolution dies. Everything becomes binary, good energy or bad energy. But real relationships demand more than good vibes. They demand emotional maturity, discomfort, forgiveness, and yes, sometimes the willingness to sit through tension without labeling it toxic. Not every uncomfortable feeling is a red flag. Some are just growing pains. The rise of this spiritual language has masked something darker, the rise of narcissism. It's the same entitlement, just rebranded. I only attract high frequencies means I only want people who agree with me. I cut off anything that drains me, often means I avoid accountability. This isn't healing, it's avoidance, it's ego. The truth is, the most grounded people rarely talk about energy. They live it, quietly. No hashtags, no crystals, no theatrics. Because maturity isn't about who disrupts your peace, it's about how you handle it, without needing to perform it. You're not supposed to be constantly improving. That idea alone is breaking people. Self-help culture turned healing into a race. You have to be better than yesterday, every single day. If you're not waking up at 5 a.m., journaling, meditating, cutting out caffeine, fixing your attachment style, and becoming a millionaire by 30, you're falling behind. That's the trap. The lie of constant progress doesn't build resilience, it builds self-hatred. Because no matter how far you go, it whispers, not enough. And so people stay addicted to self-analysis. They never live. They document. They optimize. They diagnose themselves into paralysis. Every emotion must be labeled. Every low mood must be fixed. Nothing is allowed to just be. But some seasons of life aren't meant for growth. Some are meant for survival. Some for stillness. And others for letting the dust settle without forcing clarity. But that doesn't sell. That doesn't go viral. So people chase the next book, the next retreat, the next hack, never realizing that chasing transformation is now their new distraction. Worse, this mindset teaches you to view yourself as a project. Always broken, always needing work. But humans aren't apps. You can't patch update your trauma or uninstall your insecurities. Some things in you don't need fixing. They need acceptance. And that idea is terrifying to an entire generation, taught to perform wellness instead of feeling it. The reality is, you don't need to be extraordinary. You don't need to be a brand. You don't need to always be growing. Sometimes, not falling apart is progress. Sometimes, staying in the room with your mess is braver than pretending you're on a healing journey. You're allowed to just exist, without becoming a product of your own improvement plan. Belief used to be about something beyond you. Now, it's just about you. We replaced God with the self, and it made people more fragile, not free. Everything is identity now. Personality types, politics, trauma labels, aesthetics. People don't say, I think this, or I feel that. They say, I am this, as if opinions are identities, as if categories can protect you from the chaos of being human. And it's addicting, because when you define yourself tightly enough, you don't have to question anything. You're the anxious one, the misunderstood creative, the INTJ with avoidant tendencies. It gives you a ready-made script, but it also kills curiosity. People stop asking who they could be. They just memorize their digital personality profiles and call that knowing themselves. That's why disagreement feels violent now. If your ideas are your identity, then being challenged feels like being attacked. So people cling to echo chambers, not because they're arrogant, but because their whole sense of self is paper thin. They need constant affirmation to stay intact. The internet became a temple of self-worship, and every scroll is a sermon reinforcing your chosen truth. But identity is supposed to be a tool, not a prison. It should be flexible, not sacred. You're meant to evolve, contradict yourself, outgrow your past, not curate a flawless persona to protect yourself from being misunderstood. Real maturity is tolerating the discomfort of not always knowing who you are. We act like finding our true self is the point of life. But maybe there isn't one fixed version of you to find. Maybe identity isn't something you discover, but something you risk over and over again. So the question is, if you weren't performing who you think you are, who would you become?